I wanted to make this video to share my story and my testimony about what happened to me. To be completely honest, this video is really hard for me to make. It brings up a ton of painful memories and thoughts that are really hard for me to talk about, but I feel that it's important to share nonetheless. So here it goes. Almost 1 year ago, from the time of me shooting this video, I was hanging out with some friends, cliff jumping at a place called Molten Falls here in Washington. For those of you who don't know, this place is out in the middle of nowhere. Most people don't even have cell service that far out in the woods, but thankfully, some do. You know, it's funny how quickly your life can be taken from you. How quickly your definition of normal can change forever, just because of a brief moment in time. It reminds us all of our mortality and the thin line that we all tread every day between life and death. Everything can be taken from you in an instant. You could be driving to go get groceries on a normal day. Someone could crash their car into you. You could wake up one day with a strange pain in your chest and your heart could fail. You could be doing something that you've been doing your whole life, and you could make one simple mistake that changes everything. Job 121 says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away." So, after we were there for a while and had jumped off of a few smaller cliffs, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go up to a spot that was a little bit higher up. I followed him up there and he jumped off first. My biggest mistake was that I did not watch close enough to how he made the jump. According to my other friends that were there watching from a few hundred feet away, they said that the guy who jumped right before me had barely missed the rock that I ended up hitting. That rock was about a 40-foot fall from the cliff that we were standing on. So I took a few steps back and I made a run for it and I jumped. From the moment that I jumped while suspended in the air, I could tell that I was going to hit that rock. Dread and fear rushed through my mind for the few seconds before impact. And the moment that I hit the rock, I could hear my bones snapping and breaking. My friends who were watching from a few hundred feet away told me that from where they were standing, that it sounded like tree branches snapping. After hitting the rock, the wind was knocked out of me harder than it ever has been in my entire life. I fell into the water and I didn't lose consciousness, so I was awake for the entire thing. I remember everything. The pain of the impact was indescribable. Surprised to be alive, I immediately started trying to swim to the surface and I noticed that my legs weren't working. I started having brief thoughts of if I would ever walk again. The reason that I say brief is because in moments of survival, moments where you're not sure if you're going to live or die, or what the future might hold for you, you have little time to think about anything. Your body almost goes into autopilot, just trying to survive. All I knew was that my legs weren't working. I wasn't sure if there were bones sticking out of me or what. So I tried reaching down to feel my legs, but I immediately started sinking while trying to catch my breath. This obviously resulted in me inhaling a bunch of water and choking, which sent me into an even further panic. Because of the need to breathe, I quickly forgot about what was going on with my legs, and I just started trying to swim to the surface with just my arms. Once I had gotten to the surface, I swam over to the same rock that I had just hit, and I was able to climb up on top of that rock and lay down. It's crazy to me that I didn't lose consciousness and drown when I hit the rock. I later heard stories from random people that I would run into about people who would have cliff jumping accidents in that same exact place. Stories where people would lose consciousness just because they hit the water incorrectly. And sadly, most of the stories that I've heard about the accidents that have taken place at Molten Falls have ended in people's death. People sinking to the bottom and other people not being able to get down in time to save them. I don't know why I didn't lose consciousness from hitting a rock versus hitting water. The whole thing is still really hard for me to wrap my mind around. While I was laying on the rock, all my friends came around me and I was just trying to find a comfortable position. I was just in so much pain and my body just felt wrong. It felt completely twisted and jacked up from the inside and out. I kept moving and trying to reposition myself with no success. Luckily, my roommate was close by, and he gave me the advice to stop moving, just because of the simple fact that we didn't know what was broken inside of my body, and I could have been doing further damage by jostling around so much. He suggested that I at least stop moving until the paramedics get there to advise us on what to do. You will come to find out as the story progresses that I was blessed by the fact that he was there to tell me that. So I just sat still, doing the best I could to breathe, being in the worst pain that I have ever been in my entire life, just waiting for the paramedics to get there. As I was sitting there laying on that rock, I noticed that there were small little splats of blood around me. I wasn't sure if that was from the initial impact itself or it was from after the fact, or if I was bleeding somewhere I didn't realize. My vision started to go slightly dark, and I started feeling really tired and lethargic, and I started to wonder if this is what dying felt like. But as I said earlier, in moments of survival, thoughts of what if are very brief. Then I immediately got this strange burst of energy from the inside out, and I had this feeling that things were going to be okay, the feeling that I was going to survive. I'll tell you what, the Holy Spirit gives us insight and intuition into things that we couldn't know otherwise. It took the paramedics about 30 minutes or so to get there and to get down to me. After assessing the height of the fall, they determined that it would be best to call a life flight because there was a good chance that I would be internally bleeding from the inside out. I thank God that they made that decision, because little did I know, I was losing blood at a rapid rate, and if too much more time had passed, I would have died from too much blood loss. The clock was ticking, so the paramedics started grabbing at me and getting ready to pull me onto the raft that they had came to me with. With every touch of my body, I yelled out in pain. Then one of the paramedics basically kneeled down next to me and said, "Listen, dude, this is gonna suck. So you're just gonna have to take a deep breath and accept it and do the best that you can for now." Basically saying, "Buck up, buttercup." So I took a deep breath in, and they yanked me onto the boat, and I screamed in pain. Then they took me across the water and put me on this strange one-wheeled gurney. It was designed to go over mountain terrain. With every little movement came indescribable suffering. They walked me up to the ambulance through all of the rocky and bumpy terrain. I swore that I could feel every single tiny rock that wheel rolled over. I could feel every step that the paramedics took. Every single little thing sent horrible pain throughout my body. They eventually got me to the ambulance and flipped me over onto my back. I screamed again in agonizing pain. At this point, I started to cry because the pain was just too unbearable. My suffering was profound. Once they put me in an ambulance, I asked with tears in my eyes for something to help the pain. They told me that they weren't going to give me any pain meds just yet. Then they drove me to a helicopter, loaded me up, started flying to get me to the hospital. Once they got me to the hospital, my memory started to go dark. They immediately put me under an x-ray and discovered that I had broken most of the bones in both of my feet. Those x-rays would go on to show that my bones were almost grinded into a mesh. My feet still don't look the same to this day. I broke some ribs, I shattered my pelvis in 3 different places, and I broke my spine, which would explain why my legs weren't working. I also lacerated some internal organs, which explained the bleeding. They gave me many blood transfusions trying to keep me alive. But eventually they just had to put me under and do surgery in order to save my life and stop the bleeding. Believe it or not, my systolic blood pressure dropped down to around 50, which if you know blood pressure, you know that it's a miracle that I survived that level of blood loss. They eventually told me that if I had made it to the hospital, maybe 15-20 minutes later, that I would have died because of too much blood loss. What I do remember before the surgery is being pulled into a room in a very hurried fashion, having many nurses and doctors in a panic working on me. And I remember that they put this pelvic brace on me. And remember how my pelvis was broken in 3 different places? So what this pelvic brace did was squeeze and cinch my broken bones together. The pain from this was ridiculous. I immediately woke up out of my daze and I asked the doctor, "Can you please take this thing off of me?" And he looked me right in the eyes and he said to me, "Listen, you are suffering from severe internal bleeding. This brace is keeping you alive because it's cutting off some of the blood circulation. If we take this thing off of you, you are going to die." And I literally said to the doctor, "That's fine, just go ahead and take it off." And it's not because I was in so much pain that I wanted to die, even though I know that that's how that might sound. It's because I was in such a daze from the entire experience that I wasn't even thinking logically. It's almost as though I didn't believe him when he said that to me. The next few days were a blur. They were just doing everything they could just to keep me alive. I barely remember coming out of the surgery and being intubated. which for those of you who don't know, that's when they shove a tube down your throat just to make sure that you can keep breathing. It's crazy for me to think that my body was so broken and destroyed that I couldn't even breathe on my own properly anymore. I was that close to death. As a matter of fact, I could barely move any part of my body. At first, I was just communicating with the nurses with just a pen and a piece of paper. I barely even had enough strength to lift my hands and write. It was so bad that the nurses couldn't even read because I just simply didn't even have the strength to write eligibly. Eventually, I was able to get them my parents' contact information, and they were able to get a hold of them and let them know what was going on. Many nurses, doctors, and hospital staff members told me that I would never run again and that I would probably never walk the same way again. They told me that the chances that I even survived a fall with that kind of a height was a miracle in and of itself. People who typically fall 40 feet and hit a sharp rock typically die. And of the very few that do live, the vast majority are paralyzed for the rest of their life. From the get-go, they knew that I would at least walk again. When my mom had gotten the news about what happened to me, she immediately dropped what she was doing to come and see me. Once my mom had gotten to the hospital, it had been about a day since my accident. I remember the first moment that we saw each other. We both just immediately started crying. That moment was so intense and emotional. After what had happened, she came up to me with tears in her eyes, and she started praying the hardest that I've ever seen her pray. She prayed two important verses over me. One is from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. It reads as follows: "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." She also prayed Psalm chapter 40, verses 1 through 3 over me. "I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me up out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on a rock, and he gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him." Over the next month, I had to stay in the hospital. The hospital staff was awful towards me. Awful. I had many times in the hospital where I bawled my eyes out, just begging the nursing staff to help do something with the pain. Most of the nursing staff treated me like I was some kind of rabid animal. They suggested that I had psychological problems. They told me that I was just an anxious person, which if you know me well, you know that I am not an anxious or fearful person. In my mind, I was just a desperate soul in dire need of help. As it relates to the nurses who didn't do a good job, when I would bring it up with supervisors, they would blame it on me and say that it was all my fault. This was obviously just them gaslighting me. I have so many more stories of how horrible the nursing staff was towards me during my stay. So much so that if I were to talk about it, I'd probably have to make a whole nother video about it. So if you guys are curious about it and would like to hear those stories, feel free to shoot a comment in the comment section and let me know. Eventually I'd gotten to the point where I could wiggle my toes. Eventually I got to the point where I could pee normally. Eventually I got to the point where I could sit up. Eventually I was able to sit on the edge of the bed. The first time I tried to sit on the edge of the bed, I actually almost passed out. Eventually I could sit in a chair for 5-10 minutes, and then in a wheelchair for 20. And as soon as I was able to sit up in a wheelchair for 1 hour, they knew that I could make the drive to go home with my mom. That same day when we left the hospital, my mom and I cried the entire way home. It had almost been exactly 1 month. I had been in that horrible prison of a hospital for almost 1 month. And to leave that prison was the biggest flagpole in the ground that represented progress towards normalcy that I had seen in a long time. After you lose everything like that, every little thing that you can have that brings your life one step closer to normal is the biggest blessing. I was able to control my schedule a little bit more. I had more control over the medications that I took and when I took them. In the hospital, they wouldn't even let me take my own supplements like vitamin D. I had more control over every aspect of my life. My mom was incredibly accommodating, and without her, I don't know if I could have done this. After living at my mom's house for about another month or so, I had started to run out of some of the medications that they had sent me home with, namely my fentanyl prescription. And when I ran out, they wouldn't prescribe me anymore, which brought with it horrible, agonizing withdrawals. Some of the withdrawals that I would experience would be like horrible diarrhea. For the first 3 days of my withdrawals, I only slept maybe about 1 hour over the entire 3-day period, which starts to make you go crazy after some time. I would go from hot to cold to hot to cold to hot to cold rapidly. I would sweat and then I'd be freezing. I was so emotional. I would cry about everything. And I mean everything. Things had started to really feel like they were setting in my heart that my life would never be the same again. I very, very, very often thought about suicide. I knew that I would never actually go through with doing it, but it was so dreadfully painful that the thought was still there. After doing a little bit of online research about what I was going through, I realized that it was actually opiate withdrawals and opiate dependency that I was suffering from. So once I had this realization, I stopped taking my oxycodone as well and every other form of opiates that I was taking. I was in such a place of desperation and darkness. I felt like I had lost everything. I couldn't walk. I lost around 40 pounds of muscle and fat. Close family members and friends even told me that I looked like a concentration camp survivor. I couldn't do anything without help from somebody else. In my darkest moments alone at home, just crying to myself, I would pray. One day I felt like God was strongly telling me that he wanted me to go back to church again. So I called an Uber to my house. This poor woman had no idea what she was signing up for when she accepted my Uber. She comes up to my house and I'm just sitting there in a wheelchair and I'm like, would you mind putting this wheelchair in the back of your car? And she's like, sure, I guess, you know? So I was able to get here to my local church, which is called Bethesda here in Vancouver, Washington. I did the best I could to hide in a corner in the back, so that way no one would come up and talk to me. Before I knew it, I had a crowd of people around me, putting their hands on me and praying for me. The presence of God in that moment was so indescribably powerful. Those people prayed that my body would receive healing, that I would walk again, that I would run again, that I wouldn't feel any pain. They prayed over my mind. They prayed that the depression and the anxiety and the withdrawals that I would go through would leave, and that I would feel peace. So I went on with my life after that day, continuing as normal, doing physical therapy, just trying to get a little bit more progress each day, until eventually I was actually out of my wheelchair and I was walking with a walker and boots on. Eventually I was able to walk to the end of my driveway and back. Very shortly after that, I went to the doctor's for a routine x-ray. After I'd gotten done, I assumed that the doctor would say that everything was on track and looking normal, but that's not what he said. He actually told me that the rate of healing that had taken place in my body was far beyond what he was expected was possible. He said that I was doing way better than he thought that I would be doing at this point. And he told me that he thought that there would be a serious possibility that I would run again. I immediately broke down in tears just at the thought of that. I knew that the Lord had miraculously healed me. In that moment, I remembered all of the nurses and doctors that told me that I would never run again. So not only had the Lord miraculously saved my life, not only had he miraculously made sure that I could heal from my paralyzation, but he healed me to the point that I would even be able to run again soon. After that, I went to another routine physical therapy appointment. I told my physical therapist what my doctor had said. My PT agreed with him about the progress that I was making, and he told me that he thought that I would be running within less than 1 year from my accident. I've continued to do physical therapy and receive as much prayer as I can regarding my healing. And as of the recording of this video, it's been almost 1 year since my accident, and about a month ago, I ran for the first time. And I cried my eyes out, and I told everyone that I could what God had done for me. What's even better is that other routine doctor's appointments after that, my doctor eventually told me that very, very soon that they're going to be taking the metal out of my feet. I can't believe it. I can't believe how much the Lord has delivered me from my suffering. I still feel pain, but it's very little. I feel almost no pain on a daily basis, and I know that when I get the metal out of my feet, that my pain might even be gone. And according to the doctors, I still have another year of healing that I'm going to be able to go after. And I've already regained almost complete normal functioning. The circumstances of how I survived can only be described as miraculous. The fact that I'm not paralyzed can only be described as miraculous. And the fact that I can now run is proof and evidence of God's glory. God saved my life before my family even knew about the occurrence of my accident. He saved my life before my family even had the chance to pray for me. God is a being that is outside of time. He saved my life before the accident even happened. God is with us and ravenously pursuing us, regardless of our prayers or our connection with Him. He is the embodiment of one-sided agape love. Now, I feel like God is leading me to tell as many people as I can about what happened to me. He wants me to tell as many people as I can about what He has done for me. My hope is that you can come to believe in Jesus because of all of the proof out there that miracles are real. In the Bible, there's stories of Jesus even raising people from the dead. And some might say, well, there's no verifiable proof that that even happened. And to that, I would say look up the story of a man who's alive today. His name is Dean Braxton. He's actually from the Tacoma, Washington area, and believe it or not, he died for an hour and 45 minutes and was brought back to life because of the prayers of his family. Prayers that he would be brought back to life from his death. Jesus is all over his story. And He's all over many, many stories of miracles that are all around the world that you just have to look up online and go seek out. They're everywhere. Jesus is described in the Bible as light and the source of life itself. John 1 verses 4 through 5 say, "In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And I'll say this as well. A wise man once said that there is no change without a change in routine. I encourage all of you to begin reading the Bible every day. If you don't know where to start in the Gospel of John. Incorporate this into your routine and lifestyle. Begin praying every day. Seek a relationship with the one who created you, the one who gave you the breath of life itself, the one who can renew you and shape you into the best version of yourself that you were made to be. It will change your life forever. I pinky promise. My hope is that my story will be evidence to many of you that miracles do happen and that our prayers are answered. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And Romans 8:28 says this, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose." Thank you guys so much for watching. I know that this is a bit of a longer video, but I thought that it was important for me to share about what happened with me. If you're curious about learning more about Christianity, go and check out some of the shorts on my channel. I've designed them to be short and concise as possible, but pack as much information in them as possible as well. And my hope is that those videos will serve you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a good one.